Thanks very much, Meredith, for your introduction. It's my pleasure to welcome Congressman Rick Larsen, a longtime friend of mine, and as Meredith mentioned, also of NBR's. I'm particularly pleased to introduce you as a fellow resident of the other Washington, which still is not yet experiencing spring, so it's actually lovely to be here. Congressman Larsen has recently been reelected to his 7th term in the House, representing Washington's 2nd District, where he serves on the Armed Services and Transportation Committees. As co-chair and founder of the bipartisan U.S.-China Working Group, Rick has been actively involved in crafting U.S. policy toward China. Founded in 2005, the U.S.-China Working Group educates member and staff on U.S.-China issues. The group is extremely active and regularly arranges meetings and briefings with academics, political leaders from the U.S. and China, as well as hosts regular dialogues with their Chinese counterparts. It's also been a very important sounding board for U.S. companies. Just a few weeks ago, the working group had an event for new House members with former NBR board member, Governor John Huntsman. The working group has conducted 5 successful missions to China, focusing on a wide range of issues: the global economic recession, economic rebalancing, consumer product safety, intellectual property, military-to-military relations, counter-narcotics, energy cooperation, and global climate change. Really, the whole gamut of issues for this key relationship. The working group is impressive in its accomplishments and the level of trust that it has built over a number of years. And I think this is a testament to Rick's deep engagement on the issues and his long-term approach to relationship building. He is also both patient and tenacious. Congressman Larsen most recently led a delegation of congressional members in January to Shanghai, Beijing, and Hong Kong to assess U.S.-China relations at a transition point in both countries. This was his 8th trip to China. I had the opportunity to read the report from the trip, which is on Congressman Larsen's website, and I recommend that you all read it, and I hope that Congressman Larsen will share some stories from that trip today as well. On behalf of NBR, we very much appreciate your longstanding engagement with our board, our staff, and our scholars, and we're grateful to have you here today to hear your views on the role of Congress in shaping U.S. relations with China, which we all appreciate has global ramifications. Please join me in welcoming Congressman Rick Larsen.
Thanks, Pamela. And I want to thank NBR for another invitation to speak at this conference. I spoke, was it a couple years ago, 2 years ago, the first one, and being welcomed back to speak again is an honor, and I very much appreciate that. I was asked to talk about the 113th Congress and addressing the rebalance in Asia as a whole. I'm going to do that. I'm going to talk a little bit about the trip to China and some of my thoughts about China, but also kind of write this a little more broadly as well to Asia in hopes to set the tone for the rest of the morning. And then I think we've got time for some questions. I won't have any answers for you, but if you have plenty of questions, that'll be fine. First off, again, thanks to Pamela for the introduction today, and to the NBR for not just hosting, but being a great think tank that isn't in Washington, D.C., but is headquartered in Seattle, Washington, and doing a lot of great work. I think the first thing, if you want to understand a member of Congress and all the things that we're dealing with, Meredith mentioned a few of the things that Congress is dealing with right now, but don't ever forget that ultimately what members of Congress are working on are in their districts, not here in Washington, D.C. So on top of everything else we're dealing with, budget deficits and rebalancing and immigration reform and gun violence prevention, all that, members of Congress are thinking more about what is going on at home. And that is, I think, a critical element to remember when you're working with members of Congress. And that informs a little bit of my background in working on Asia issues, because from the nation's capital, from the U.S. Capitol, the Asia-Pacific region is commonly referred to as the Far East. there's an assumption that we still have to go east to get there. From where I live in Washington State, it's the near west, because I can just go out my back door and there it is. And in that sense, for me, Asia, the Asia Pacific, is a much closer place than maybe how some folks around Washington, D.C., my colleagues, see Asia. It has a huge influence on the lives of people residing in my district, from the benefits of trade, the increased commerce between Washington State businesses and countries in Asia as a whole, to the impact of thousands of sailors stationed at Navy Station Everett or Naval Air Station Whidbey Island. Frankly, not a day goes by in my district where people maybe aren't thinking directly about Asia Pacific region, but a lot of what we do depends upon the relationships that we have across the Pacific. And every 2 years after an election, I sit down with my staff to discuss with them what are going to be the goals for the next 2 years in Congress. And like past years, we've set out goals, and the first goal we always have is sort of the economic goal. What can we do to help create jobs in the district? The second goal this year is really focused on leading efforts for further economic and strategic engagement in the Asia Pacific region, nationally with an eye to reshaping national security policy in the 21st century, and locally continue to connect the Pacific Northwest to the growing economic opportunities in the region. And I'm not alone in this mindset. Over the past 30 years, as this region has become an engine for global economic growth, Congress has played an instrumental role in building the economic, diplomatic, and security architecture necessary for the prosperity in this region and at home, and that's a role that 113th Congress can continue to play. Before I discuss my viewpoints on rebalancing, just take a few minutes to mention an elephant in the political room, if you will. It has to do with the budget and budget deficits and the sequestration, which is a Latin word meaning what in the hell are we doing to ourselves? Actually, I don't think it's Latin. But it is a question mark for a lot of folks at home and, of course, on Capitol Hill that we have the sequestration. Why do we do this? And now that we have it, why do we keep it? It is certainly having an impact on the financial decisions that we're making in Congress. And but it was heartened to read, at least in the administration's budget document, that despite sequestration, the rebalancing, the refocusing, continued focus on Asia will continue. But that still means we still have work to do in Congress to, in my view, replace sequestration with something a little more balanced. And I believe that if we can do that, we right our economic ship, the U.S. Will be well positioned to sustain our interests and common interests in the Pacific for quite some time. And I hold this position for three reasons. One is as the U.S. Discovers new methods to collect natural gas, that becomes more of a reality. We continue to invest in renewable energy. Our nation is well positioned to reduce energy dependence on other countries, a reducing dependence that will have profound implications for future foreign policy. Second, the ingenuity of Americans and the American entrepreneur, mixed with a highly trained workforce, a very flexible business community, will continue to keep us in a great position. And finally, we have positive long-term graphics. We're resource-rich, a secure geography with good neighbors to the north and the south that are bonded through many ties. So I just think if you look at the long-term picture for the U.S., if we can get our budget picture in order, everything else should fall into place. Of course, I wouldn't be an American if I wasn't optimistic either, would I? So, but our optimism is usually based upon continuing to work to make something happen and never quitting on that. And so just moving on now, in recognition of Asia's increasing global importance, come on in, take a seat. Don't mind me. I'm surprised people are coming in while I'm talking. They're usually leaving while I'm talking.
You've moved up.
I've moved up, yeah. For 60 years, the U.S. has been a Pacific power with economic reach, with military strength, political interests that are linked with Asia's economic security and political order. And the overarching objective has been to sustain a stability in the region, economic openness, peaceful resolution of disputes, respect for universal rights and freedoms, and achieve the aims of the rebalance strategy. I think what the administration is trying to do is to implement a whole-of-government approach that uses all the tools of the U.S. government. There's a lot of focus on the military aspects of the rebalancing, and I assure you, at least from my point of view, that's one of many aspects of it. The rebalance rests on three pillars: strengthening partnerships with historical alliances, while deepening engagement with a lot of emerging powers and emerging countries, engaging more and empowering regional institutions, and trying to build a regional architecture that fosters economic integration across the region. The U.S. alliance network in the Pacific is really the foundation. Great key strategic allies, of course: Japan, the Republic of Korea, Australia, Thailand, the Philippines. We're trying to strengthen and modernize these relationships. Over the past 4 years, we've made it a priority to increase cooperation and training and coordination on regional security issues. And as a result of these investments, our relationships with Korea and Japan are becoming more popular domestically than any other time in our history. And I like to think overseas we're being welcomed more so than we have in the past as well. But beyond these traditional allies, the rebalance calls for a broadening engagement with many other countries in the region, including India, New Zealand, and Vietnam, Singapore, and others. I'm not going to name them all. Just assume I have, but I'm not going to name them all. Our regional partnerships will be enhanced in the years ahead as the U.S. invests in building partner capacity of the region, providing our partners in the region the ability to secure their own interests. But these investments will also, I think, enhance the U.S. ability to build the capacity of emerging partners in key areas like humanitarian assistance and disaster relief and maritime security. But it also relies on engaging and empowering regional institutions, and perhaps the most telling commitment to the rebalance strategy is the active engagement that we've shown in the region recently. It's often been said that decisions are made by those who show up, and in no place is that more important than in this region. From the appointment of an ambassador to ASEAN, the active participation from the executive branch in the recent APEC and East Asia Summit forums, finally being invited to the EAS, the U.S. has actively sought to advance regional cooperation, promote stability, regional trade and investment, human rights, and the rule of law. Now, sustaining these investments in regional diplomacy will be a priority of mine in the years to come, assuming I have years to come, as these investments have already proven to be beneficial to our relationships in the region. The emergence of Asia's economic rise has a profound implication on and provides opportunities for U.S. interests. And for this reason, building a regional architecture that fosters economic integration is important as well. And that's where the TPP comes into play, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Perhaps right now, well, it's the only, but it's the most closely watched trade and investment negotiation in the world. And of course, the discussion on TPP would not be complete now without the recent inclusion of Japan to the negotiations. And I'm pleased that the U.S. is supporting the inclusion of Japan in TPP as a net positive, as long as high standards that have been negotiated to date are maintained. And this is going to be very important. With the inclusion of Japan, the 12 countries in TPP account for nearly 40% of global GDP and roughly one-third of world trade. This changes the perception of TPP around the world, and the world's active trade, and among the active trade negotiations, TPP is the largest and I think the most significant. And the addition of Japan pushes TPP to the forefront as a leading forum for economic integration in the Asia Pacific. Now let me discuss China a little bit and rebalancing in my trip that I took in January. The days go by so quickly around here, January. As the U.S. increases our involvement in the Asia Pacific, cooperation between the U.S. and China, I think, is going to become more important. And for the first time since the Chinese Communist Party came to power in 1949, the U.S. and China have undergone leadership transitions at the same time. In fact, as we know, a lot of transitions took place in the last 6 months for countries in this region. Japan South Korea, in addition to U.S. and China. And so transitioning governments with a mix of new leaders and existing leaders present the U.S. and China an opportunity to build on areas of mutual benefit and to round the edges of sharp policy decisions and disputes. The relationship with China is itself a web of intersecting political and economic and security and cultural relationships. There's not one relationship that we have with China. It is really many. And some of you have heard me speak, have heard me say that over and over and over again. It really is a collection of relationships. And as China seeks to slowly enact governance and economic reforms, and the U.S. continues to grow its economy, break down, hopefully, in our country, political stagnation, we also need to be sure that we maintain a constructive engagement between the two countries. Also, as hostilities and provocations have escalated the past 2 months on the Korean Peninsula, the U.S. and China have a shared interest with many others in ensuring that tensions do not develop beyond rhetoric. I'm sure I, like many in Congress, have been encouraged by Secretary Kerry's meetings with President Xi Jinping, and I hope that the Chinese leadership continues to press the Kim regime to abandon its nuclear ambitions. But this encouragement has to be tempered with recognition that Chinese new leadership will largely be focused, in my view, inward in the years to come. Rebalancing the Chinese economy from an export and investment-heavy model to one that's consumption-based, tackling corruption throughout the party system, and implementing measures to reverse environmental degradation, I think will actually consume the Chinese leadership's time over the next decade. In January, 4 members of the U.S.-China Working Group and I traveled to China to try to gain some insight on these challenges. We found reason to believe that China is taking the steps necessary to rebalance their economy. The incoming economic team in China recognizes that future economic development must be paired with environmental and social considerations, more so than the rhetoric of the past. The real challenge for the party and the government in Beijing will be ensuring that these top-down edicts do get carried out at local levels. The long term, Chinese political and economic reforms pose the most challenging, pose the biggest challenge for the incoming standing committee members. However, more immediate to the leadership is, and most likely what keeps Xi and Li up at night, is the maintaining stability and legitimacy of the Communist Party with the Chinese people. 2 issues that pose legitimacy concerns for the party are environmental degradation and corruption. I could go into detail about this, but it is in the report on my website, and broader discussion about both of these issues. But recently, severe pollution in China's capital has led residents to really doubt the viability and survivability of the current economic model and the ability of the Chinese government to provide things as basic as safe air and water for the Chinese people. Tackling environmental degradation, while a component of the 12th five-year plan, will not be easy or quick, and it's because this is because the causes of the smog in the capital, factories operating in Hebei province, and the astounding multiplication of automobiles in Beijing streets are unlikely to decrease substantially in the long term. Another challenge is corruption within the Chinese Communist Party. Now, Wang Qishan used to be vice premier and is now the newly appointed head of the Party Discipline Inspection Commission, has been tasked with enforcing party discipline throughout all levels of the government. And I had an opportunity to meet with Wang in January, and he conceded that corruption was a major problem, which is why he's been appointed to it. I didn't tell him this joke. I will provide this joke to you, but said, as vice premier, he had to deal with, his job was to deal with the Americans, which was the second worst job in China. Now he has to deal with corruption in China, so he has the worst job in China. It is going to be quite an undertaking for him, but an important one, and I think a recognition of his abilities that Xi has put him in this place. Now, Wang noted that China continued to proceed through a stage of accelerated growth that presented numerous challenges to keep the party clean. And during the struggle to combat corruption and the fight to identify and eradicate its roots causes, the party's conclusion has been that they actually need to build clean government, if you will, into their own institutions, and they just don't have that. I believe Wong is genuine in his desire to root out corruption, but what's left unanswered is the amount of latitude, obviously, he's going to have. I just want to touch on military-to-military dialogue. I think that's key to understanding and mitigating many of the sources of tension between the U.S. and China. For the past century, Asia has, in one form or another, been under Western influence, but events in Asia, and primarily the rise of China's military, are redefining the balance of power in the region. I think we need to recognize that better here in the U.S., especially as it impacts other friends and allies in the region. I think as China rises in power and influence there, there's perhaps a rising expectation of China's dominance or having more power, and that as a result, tensions are bound to rise. So more engagement and additional communication is needed to stake out some pretty firm positions on issues as they arise and to eliminate the lack of transparency in some of the relationships that exist in the military. China's recent decision to join the Rim of the Pacific exercises, from our perspective, from a U.S. perspective, is a step in the right direction, and will hopefully lead to a better understanding of Chinese capabilities and intentions. China's decision to work with the U.S. to establish a cybersecurity working group, and they're measured, but I think from a general perspective, an increased pressure on North Korea. Most members of Congress would say are positive points, but data points right now, as opposed to determining it's actually a change in policy. So I think it'll just be important for leaders on both sides of the Pacific to maintain these gains, strengthen them in the future. Finally, what does this all mean for Congress? So if that's sort of a broad brush stroke, not a very adequate one, I'm sure, of the U.S. and Asia generally, what does that mean for Congress? Well, I think the 113th Congress is going to continue to play a strong role in the rebalancing in the Pacific. Ultimately, it's up to Congress to provide resources for the strategy, to confirm key personnel to represent America's interests, and to establish relationships with leaders across the Asia Pacific. So last week, the President released his budget, and in it, he devoted funding to numerous initiatives that links the budget to the strategy. An oft-heard complaint this past year that the budget wasn't tied to the strategy wasn't tied to any budget. But the President's budget commits additional resources to the Trans-Pacific Partnership, to this export initiative, to the U.S. Trade Representative's Office and International Trade Administration for the Interagency Trade Enforcement Center. The President's budget contains money for multilateral institutions in the region, such as ASEAN, APEC, the ASEAN Regional Forum. Through the Lower Mekong Initiative, the budget provides dollars over 3 years to enhance cooperation between Cambodia, Laos, Thailand, Vietnam, and Burma. And on the security front, the budget provides $87 million for rotational deployment of Marine Corps units and Air Force and aircraft and crew to Australia. It includes dollars for military infrastructure on Guam and the State Department as well. In their budget, it provides over $1 billion in funding, including dollars for military assistance and law enforcement assistance. So these budget lines I've highlighted are but a fraction of investments that have been and will continue to be made in the Asia Pacific. Congress is also in discussion with the administration on the renewal of Trade Promotion Authority. Republicans and Democrats alike are eager to have this conversation in order to help establish new trade deals and set the direction of U.S. trade policy. Now, in my discussions with the U.S. Trade Representative's Office, I get the impression that USTR is trying to engage Congress on what the best approach to taking to TPA is, whether there should be a timeline for Trade Promotion Authority that starts and ends for a certain time, or whether TPA should be tethered to individual agreements. That conversation is still ongoing, and in the months ahead, I hope we come to a conclusion on that. But these conversations are taking place with the executive branch, but part of the challenge we face in Congress is that many of these conversations are taking place with people who are in an acting capacity. That is, folks have not been permanently appointed to some of these positions. The shortfall of experienced Asia hands in key administrations currently is something that needs to get fixed, and we continue to press the administration to make those appointments, especially at the State Department and at the U.S. Trade Rep's office, to appoint nominees to fill these positions with primary responsibilities in the Asia-Pacific region. The last area Congress should be more involved in is establishing our own relationships with leaders in the Asia-Pacific region. It's important that other governments have an understanding of our political system. It's not just the American people that should understand our political system, I think. I think people around the world ought to understand it. You will understand members of Congress. People try to understand Congress when they should try to understand members of Congress. It's something that's very important to make a distinction about. Because if we recognize the role that Congress plays in our nation's decision-making and having relationships with these with leaders, it can help move things along in our process. As Pamela noted, I've had an opportunity to travel to China 8 times, and actually this year alone I've traveled to China and India. We're trying to put another trip together back to the region sometime later this year, to a few other countries as well, to continue engagement and continue education, our own education as members of Congress. And I guess, I suppose I'll be traveling in the future back to the region as well. But every time, I think the big lesson I get is that there's always more to learn. I don't purport to be an expert on China, although having been there 8 times, one thing I've learned is that there's a lot left to learn, and just as much as the U.S. is always changing, China is really always changing as well. So with that, I just want to thank you all again for coming out and helping out MBR in this conference, to hear a little bit from me and I think soon some staff folks from the Hill to talk about the U.S.-Asia relationship. And thank you all again. Look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Congressman Larsen. That was a very, very helpful survey of issues, but also your ability to really highlight those aspects of the budget that have changed, I think, was extremely helpful. And to reinforce the importance of having Asia experts and China experts in the administration is quite critical. We're going to open it up to questions. If you could please provide your name and affiliation, and then your question. And we have sort of about 10 minutes, so we would like to get as many questions in as possible. So if your questions could be short, that would be great. Over here.
Julia Chang-Block from the U.S.-China Education Trust. Congressman, I wonder whether you think that the rebalance to Asia policy will be as high priority under Secretary Kerry as under Secretary Clinton, given the thrust or the focus that Secretary Kerry has put on the Middle East and his travel and so on, and also including what he has said.
Thanks. I think it's first off, I think it is very important that Secretary Kerry is focusing on the Middle East. So I don't want to downplay that at all. I think that the rebalance will largely be driven out of the White House, at any rate. But the real next key will be the speed at which the administration comes up with appointments for some of these key positions in the State Department having to do with Asia policy, appointments that haven't yet been made and need to be made.
Over here in the back.
My name is Sam Letter. I'm with the Federation of Electric Power Companies of Japan. My question is regarding natural gas. You mentioned that during your presentation. Could you speak more about your position on natural gas exports and how that might affect our relationships with allies in other countries in Asia? Thank you.
Sure. I think the export of natural gas provides an opportunity for the U.S. for jobs and also provides us an opportunity to develop a whole new set of relationships with countries in Asia. I support natural gas exports so long as they're done. The facilities are built with the right public input under our rules, under our environmental impact statement, EIS processes. I think it can be done safely. Not a popular position in the Democratic Party.
Up here in front.
Could you wait for a microphone, please?
My name is
Could you give a microphone, please? Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Hasmukh Shah from Business Times. As a prominent member of the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, I have an important question to ask you regarding our own America's transportation infrastructure problems.
Yeah.
Many countries are coming, leaders of the many countries are coming to America for attracting U.S. investments. In fact, today, the Indian foreign minister is visiting New York and trying to attract U.S. capital for India's infrastructure, which needs $1 trillion. But we, America, needs $5 trillion for infrastructure. See our roads, transportation, bridges. So I think that is very important that we should attract foreign investment into America so that it creates more jobs and helps support President Obama's objective. Thank you. What is your panelists thinking about it? How do you expect to attract foreign investment into infrastructure? Thank you.
Thank you. First off, I would argue that we shouldn't rely on foreign investment to finance our infrastructure. It can be part of financing certain parts of the infrastructure. I don't really, I can't speak to other countries and how they structure financing, but in the U.S., it's roads, bridges, highways. It's largely financed by public dollars. From a federal level, mainly the gas tax. At state level, mainly the gas tax. And at local levels, mainly property tax. That's probably not going to change, but there's probably room in that for private investment as well. But we should not be looking to private sector investment, whether that's domestic or foreign, to replace financing of roads, bridges, and highways in the U.S. It can be a complement, a supplement, but not a replacement. The flip side of that is if you look at how we finance airport infrastructure, there's a lot more private sector investment in that. And then going even to another mode of port development, there's even more private sector investment in that. So there are opportunities more so in areas like ports and ports, rail, and airports than there is in roads, bridges, highways in the U.S.
You have a question in the back?
Never know what question.
Good morning. I'm Mr. Lloyd from the Philippine Daily Inquirer. This is about national and international and regional security. How far is the U.S. in considering a comeback of a military base in the Philippines, considering that the one we have in Australia is quite far from the Asian mainland and the adjoining islands in the area? So I just want to know what's the development of the U.S. consideration of having the military base again in the Philippines. Thank you.
There will not be another military base in the Philippines like the ones we've had before. There'll be, but the U.S. is trying to reinvigorate the treaty alliance with the Philippines and trying to find an appropriate, an appropriate footprint that continues to show our commitment to the treaty. But that has to be done, obviously, in conjunction and cooperation and approval of the Philippine government. But we're not about to do another Subic Bay anywhere.
We have a question up front here.
I should just say, in my view, we're not about to. My assessment is that. Yeah.
Thanks, Eric Weiner with the Answer Asia Pacific Project. You said that rebalance policy will be driven out of the White House. I guess my question is there clarity on the Hill of what the rebalance strategy is? There's a lot of confusion, and there's others on the Hill have expressed frustration at a lack of clarity. Besides, the policy pronouncements are coming from Donald's speeches, but I guess so there seems to be some gaps. Can you respond to that?
Do you want an honest response?
Absolutely.
I think some members of Congress are making up their confusion.
So you have complete clarity on.
I think the administration's been very clear. You just have to you just have to read what they've said. They've been very clear, and I think some members of Congress, if they put 15 minutes into this, it will be very clear to them that the rebalancing strategy is a broad-based strategy consisting of military, economic, trade, and diplomatic emphasis from the administration, and an added emphasis. Not that it didn't exist under the Bush administration. It did, but it's sort of adding on top of that. That's what I would argue. It's all very clear, and I kind of just scratch my head at some of my colleagues when they say they're confused by it.
We have a question in the back, over here, behind you.
Stanley Kober. A few weeks ago, there was a meeting in Moscow which hosted...
I wasn't there.
Neither was I, but I've read about it. In which they hosted delegations from India and China to discuss the situation in Afghanistan post-2014. That was followed by a meeting in Beijing, which hosted delegations from Moscow and Pakistan. And last week, India and China held a counterterrorism meeting to discuss the situation post-2014 in Afghanistan. We have been so focused on our own rebalancing. Is there another rebalancing going on in Asia focused on closer collaboration among Russia, China, and India to deal with Afghanistan post-2014?
Could you, without going through the whole thing, could you just focus on your question? What was the question part?
Is there another rebalancing going on? We are so focused on what we are doing.
Are you asking me to assess what Russia, China, and India are doing? I don't have an assessment on that. What I know of it is what you just told me, so I don't have an assessment on that.
Shihoko Goto with the Wilson Center. I want to go back to the original rebalance question. Given the budgetary situation in the United States, expectations for Japan and South Korea, Taiwan, and other countries to increase their own military spending is going up. What would the U.S. response to be to such budgetary moves by the other countries, the other allies?
Without getting into the relative amounts of increased defense spending, I think that the U.S. would certainly welcome. Well, I would welcome the other countries in the region taking on more of the responsibility of some security in the region, maritime security especially, done in a partnership with other countries, including the United States. I think that is something that we've always desired to have happen in Asia. What makes it tricky or challenging is that there's no overriding security architecture like you have in NATO and in Europe, and being able to use the infrastructure of NATO in order to do capacity building and partnership training. And I'm not suggesting that we have that in Asia, but I'm just saying it makes it a little more difficult to coordinate between countries because you have countries operating without that architecture. On the other hand, the U.S. can play a part in helping with coordination of countries to take a little bit more of the security responsibility in a partnership with other countries, including the U.S. Something we should encourage. Whether that means it's more money or less money per budget, I'll leave it to individual countries to decide what that would mean for them.
We have time for one more question, right here in front.
Thank you, Congressman. Bernard Gordon, University of New Hampshire. Good to see you again. My question really could deal with Ms. Passman as well. It focuses on the TPP and the intellectual property issue. I've written, other people have written, that the TPP is very good in terms of representing broad goals, U.S. goals, but there's a constant drumbeat from Australia, from New Zealand, from NGOs in the United States, arguing that the American position is too extreme, and Chile, for example, is sometimes threatened. Maybe it's not, the TPP is not worth the effort. How do you assess whether that issue is liable to become a major one, or can it be effectively dealt with. I hope I have said that correctly.
Yeah, yeah, sure. With regards to intellectual property, right? Yeah, sure. My assessment of that is that for as troubling as trade agreements can be for Democrats sometimes or all the time, if there aren't high standards for intellectual property in the TPP, you're going to have problems with Republicans too. We're not going to have a trade agreement that undermines intellectual property provisions in U.S. law. We're just not. That'd be my assessment. I just that agreement has to get through a House and through a Senate, and I've talked to some of my colleagues on the Republican side of the aisle, and intellectual property is an extremely important issue to them, and it's important to Democrats too. It's important to all of us. So.
Let me follow up with that. I mean, as I said, there's a drumbeat from people who are on the NGO side, constantly arguing that these.
Use a microphone, please. Can you use a microphone, please?
There's a drumbeat of arguments that our standards are. I happen not to agree with this, but that our standards are too high, or that they affect negatively developing countries and all the rest of it. Is that an issue that you think that USTR will be able to successfully work with in order to maintain the IP standards in the TPP?
I have full confidence in the U.S. Trade Representative's office.
I think that's a great note to end on. Please join me in thanking Congressman Larsen for joining us today and his great insights.